A man can spend 40 years paying mortgages, fixing roofs, burying his wife, raising a child, and still have somebody with no name on the deed walk through his door and call it family property. That was the day I learned a key only opens a lock. It does not hand over a life's work. And by the time my son-in-law's father understood that, the sheriff already had his name in a report, the locks had been changed, and the cabin he thought he was easing into for retirement was legally farther from him than the moon. My name is Walter Harlan. I'm 68 years old, born in Ohio, raised mostly in Michigan, and I spent 36 years running a plumbing supply company outside Grand Rapids before I sold it and started waking up without an alarm. I have one daughter, Laura. She is 34, smart in a way that makes people underestimate her until it is too late, and she has her mother's habit of going quiet when she is thinking hard. My wife, Helen, passed 6 years ago. Cancer. I won't dress that up. Some things do not need decoration. Helen loved one place more than anywhere else in the world. A small cedar-sided cabin on Torch Lake, about 3 hours north of my house. We bought it in 1998 when Laura was still losing baby teeth, and I was still working Saturdays. It was not fancy then. The dock leaned, the kitchen floor dipped near the sink, every window stuck in July. But Helen walked through it once, looked out over that blue water, and said, "This place feels like it's waiting for us." So I bought it. Over the years, I rebuilt the dock, replaced the windows, added a screened porch, and put in a stone fireplace that took me 2 summers because I was too stubborn to hire the mason my brother recommended. Helen made it a home. She hung quilts over the railing, planted lavender near the steps, kept a blue ceramic cookie jar on the kitchen counter even when there were no cookies in it. She said a kitchen without a cookie jar looked like nobody was expected. After she died, I did not go there much for a while. The quiet was too loud. Then, slowly, I started going back. I would open the windows, sweep the porch, sit in Helen's rocker facing the lake, and feel sad in a way that was clean instead of crushing. That spring, I decided to restore the place properly. New dock boards, updated wiring, fresh paint, safer stairs down to the water. Not to sell it. Never that. I wanted the cabin ready for Laura's future children, if she and Evan ever had them. I wanted it kept in the family, but protected. I wanted what Helen and I built to outlive both of us, without turning into bait for anybody else's greed. Laura had married Evan Price 2 years earlier. Evan was a decent man, a little soft around his parents, but decent. He worked in medical device sales, said please to waitresses, and called me sir until I told him for the 5th time that Walter would do. His parents, Carl and Denise Price, lived near Fort Wayne, Indiana. Carl had owned 3 businesses and blamed other people for the failure of all 3. Denise smiled, with only her mouth. Some people do that. You can see it if you pay attention. I had never disliked them exactly. I just never trusted the way Carl looked at things he didn't own. The trouble started on a Tuesday in May. I drove up to the cabin to meet a carpenter named Mason, who was supposed to look at the dock railing. The appointment was at 1. I remember because I stopped at a diner near Cadillac for coffee and eggs, and the waitress told me I had plenty of time if I didn't drive like somebody's grandfather. I told her I was somebody's grandfather in training. She laughed. I tipped her well. It was one of those Michigan days that looks gentle until the wind comes off the water and reminds you who is in charge. Blue sky, hard light, pine shadows across the road. I was in a good mood. I had a folder on the passenger seat with estimates, a grocery bag with 2 sandwiches, and a can of Helen's favorite lemon oil because I planned to polish her cedar chest while I was there. I turned onto the gravel lane at 12:38. The first thing I saw was the gate standing open. Not broken. Open. Then I saw tire marks in the damp gravel. Fresh ones. Wide ones. Like from a trailer. I slowed down before the bend, and when the cabin came into view, my hands tightened on the wheel. There were 4 vehicles in my drive. A black Ford Expedition I recognized immediately as Carl Price's. A white minivan. A red pickup with Ohio plates. And backed up near the side porch, a small U-Haul trailer with its rear door open. My dock boards were stacked neatly where Mason had delivered them the week before, but somebody had moved my porch furniture onto the lawn. Smoke was rising from my grill. Music came from inside the cabin, not loud, just comfortable. The kind of volume people use when they believe they have a right to be where they are. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds. That is one thing age gives you, my friends. You learn not to run straight into every fire. You look first. You count. You breathe. Then you decide whether it is a fire or a trap. I turned off the truck, took my phone from the cup holder, and walked up the gravel. The front door was open. I stepped inside my own cabin and saw Carl Price standing in my kitchen with a beer in his hand, wearing boat shoes on Helen's braided rug. Denise was at my pantry, moving cans from one shelf to another like she was organizing a place she had claimed. Evan's younger brother, Todd, was carrying a cardboard box labeled Lake Room toward the hallway. Two women I didn't know were sitting at my table eating potato salad from a plastic tub. A teenage boy was sprawled across my sofa with his sneakers on the cushions. And on the screened porch, beside the window overlooking the lake, Helen's rocker had been pushed aside so somebody could set up a folding card table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Carl turned, saw me, and grinned. Not embarrassed. Not startled. Grinned. "Walter," he said, spreading his arms, as if I had arrived at his barbecue. "You made good time." I looked at the U-Haul boxes. I looked at Denise's hands in my pantry. I looked at the muddy sneaker prints on the floor Helen used to mop twice before guests came. Then I looked back at Carl. "What are you doing in my cabin?" Denise closed the pantry door slowly, like I had interrupted a private conversation. Carl chuckled. "Relax." Evan gave us the code. We were just getting things ready. "Ready for what?" "For summer," he said. "Family should use family places. You know how it is." I took one step farther into the kitchen. "This is not your family place." That was when Denise sighed, soft and annoyed, as if I was being difficult over napkins. "Walter," she said, "Laura is your only child. Evan is her husband. One day this will be theirs anyway. We're not strangers." The teenage boy on my sofa laughed under his breath. Carl lifted his beer toward the lake. "Exactly. No need to make this awkward. We figured we'd start bringing a few things up now. Save everybody trouble later. I have been angry in my life. I have slammed doors. I have said things I regretted. I have stood in hospital hallways and hated God for not answering faster. But standing there in that cabin, looking at a man holding a beer in my kitchen while his wife rearranged my dead wife's pantry, I felt something colder than anger. I felt the switch inside me move from hurt to record. I took out my phone. Carl's smile thinned. "Who are you calling?" I looked him in the eye. "The sheriff." That got the room quiet. Denise's face changed first. Todd stopped moving with the box in his hands. One of the women at the table set her fork down. Carl gave a short laugh, but there was less air in it. "Come on, Walter. Don't be ridiculous." I pressed the call button. When the dispatcher answered, I gave my name, the address, and said clearly, "There are unauthorized people inside my property. They entered using a code I did not give them. They have brought moving boxes and a trailer. I want a deputy here, and I want a trespass report filed." Carl set his beer down. That was the first smart thing he had done all day. While we waited, nobody ate. Nobody moved boxes. Nobody talked about family. Carl tried twice to start explaining, but I held up one hand and said, "Save it for the deputy." The deputy arrived 11 minutes later. Her name was Deputy Marlene Ortiz, and she had the calmest eyes I've ever seen on a person wearing a badge. I showed her my driver's license, the property tax bill I kept in my truck folder, and the deed copy I had scanned on my phone. Carl tried to interrupt her 3 times. She let him get about 5 words out each time before saying, "Sir, I'm speaking with the property owner." That sentence did more work than any shouting could have. I walked Deputy Ortiz through the cabin, the U-Haul, the boxes, the pantry, the people, the grill. The teenage boy finally took his shoes off my couch without being asked. Then we found the second thing that mattered. On the small desk in the guest room, beside a stack of Carl's fishing magazines, was an envelope from a utility company addressed to Carl Price at my cabin address. Deputy Ortiz took a photograph of it. Carl's face turned the color of old paper. I said nothing. I did not need to. The room was speaking for me. Deputy Ortiz told every person there they had to leave. She explained that returning without written permission from me would risk arrest for trespassing. She took names. She took plate numbers. She gave me a case number. Carl stood in the driveway while Todd loaded the boxes back into the U-Haul. The whole time, he kept looking at me like I had betrayed him by treating his behavior as exactly what it was. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly when the others were out of earshot. "Laura won't appreciate this." I looked toward the lake. The water was bright and hard under the sun. "Carl," I said, "the mistake was believing my daughter's marriage gave you a shoreline." He opened his mouth, then closed it. A locksmith from Elk Rapids arrived before the sheriff's dust had settled. I had called him while the U-Haul was still backing out. He changed both door locks, reset the smart keypad, removed Evan's code, added a new gate chain, and helped me install a temporary camera over the front porch. By 5 that afternoon, every old code was dead. Then I called Laura. She answered, cheerful. "Hey, Dad. How's the cabin?" I closed my eyes for 1 second. "Honey, did you give Evan the door code?" A pause. "Yes," she said slowly. "Last fall, remember? In case you needed him to check the heat during that freeze." "Why? Did you tell him to give it to his parents?" "No." Her voice changed on that one word. It got smaller. I told her everything. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just facts. Vehicles, boxes, U-Haul, pantry, utility mail, sheriff, report number. By the time I finished, she was crying. "I didn't know," she said. "Dad, I swear to you, I didn't know." "I believe you. Evan told me his parents wanted to spend a weekend up north sometime. I told him we'd ask you when you were ready. I never said they could go. I never said they could bring things." "I believe you," I said again. There was a rustling sound. Then her voice moved away from the phone. "Evan, get in here." I almost smiled, though there was nothing funny about it. That evening, Mason the carpenter showed up late because he had mixed up the day. He found me sitting on the porch with 2 untouched sandwiches and Helen's cedar chest open beside me. I had checked it after everyone left. Nothing was missing, but someone had taken Helen's quilt out and folded it on the guest bed like decoration. Mason stood there a moment, cap in his hands, and said, "Bad day?" I said, "It just became a documented one." He nodded like that made perfect sense. The next morning, I called my attorney, Gloria Whitcomb. Gloria is 72, wears red glasses, and has the professional warmth of a bank vault. She handled the sale of my company and Helen's estate paperwork. I trust her because she does not waste words, and she does not confuse kindness with weakness. I gave her the sheriff's case number. I emailed photographs. I sent the utility envelope, which Deputy Ortiz had allowed me to keep after photographing it. I told her about Carl's comment that Laura would inherit the cabin anyway. Gloria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Walter, that was not a misunderstanding. That was a rehearsal." That was exactly the word, a rehearsal. Over the next week, more pieces appeared. The utility company confirmed someone had attempted to add Carl Price as a mailing contact for service notifications. A local handyman called me asking if Mr. Price still wanted a quote for bunk beds in the back room. The neighbor, 2 cabins down, Shirley Beck, sent me a photo from the previous Friday showing Carl's expedition parked by my gate. And Mason found 2 screws missing from the old sign at the end of the lane, the sign Helen painted herself. Harlan Cabin. In Carl's trailer, from what Shirley saw, there had been a new sign wrapped in plastic, Price Lake Place. When Shirley told me that, I did not speak for a full 10 seconds. Then I thanked her and wrote it down. Brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. When somebody is bold enough to rename what your wife painted, they have already moved past asking. They are just waiting for you to be too polite to stop them. I was done being polite in ways that helped the wrong people. Gloria sent certified trespass notices to Carl and Denise Price, Todd Price, and the 2 adults whose names came from the sheriff's report. She sent a separate letter to Evan, not accusing him, but formally stating that he had no authority to grant access to the cabin or share codes with anyone. She also drafted an invoice for cleaning, lock replacement, camera installation, and damage inspection. It was not a fortune. It was $2,186.40. Enough to be real. Enough to say this was not family inconvenience. This was unauthorized use of private property. Carl called me the day he received the letter. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that one go, too. On the third call, I answered and said, "You have Gloria's number." He came in hot. Men like Carl often do when paper takes away the room they use to perform. "You sent me a bill?" he barked. "I sent you consequences. For visiting family? For entering my property without permission, bringing a trailer, attempting to use my address, and moving my wife's belongings." He got quiet at the word wife. Not out of respect, out of calculation. "You're going to poison Laura against Evan," he said. "No," I said. "You may have already tried that. I'm protecting her from the fallout. She'll own it. One day." "No," I said. "She will benefit from what I choose to leave her. That is not the same thing as you owning anything. You can't keep family out forever." I looked through my kitchen window at the maple tree Helen planted when Laura graduated high school. "Watch me," I said, and hung up. 2 days later, Carl proved he had learned nothing. The porch camera alerted my phone at 9:12 on Saturday morning. I was at home, drinking coffee, wearing slippers Helen would have called ugly. The screen showed Carl at the gate with his expedition idling behind him. Denise sat in the passenger seat. The red pickup was behind them. Carl punched the old code into the dead keypad. Nothing happened. He tried again. Then he grabbed the gate and shook it like a man who thought iron would respond to entitlement. I called Deputy Ortiz's office and gave the case number. A deputy was there in 19 minutes. I watched it live from my phone, coffee cooling in my hand. Carl argued. Denise pointed toward the cabin. The deputy pointed toward the road. Carl showed papers. The deputy shook his head. Then Carl got back into his expedition, backed up too fast, and left. That was the first time I smiled. Not because I enjoyed it, because the system worked when I used it. On Sunday, Laura and Evan came to my house. Laura hugged me hard in the entryway and did not let go right away. Evan stood behind her, looking like a man who had slept badly for a week. Good. Some sleep should be lost when you hand the wrong person a key. We sat at my kitchen table. I put coffee out. Nobody touched it. Evan started first. "Walter, I'm sorry." I waited. He swallowed. "My dad asked for the code months ago. He said he wanted to surprise my mom with a weekend up there if you said yes, and he wanted to check the place first. I told him no. Then he kept pressing. He said family shouldn't have to beg. I finally gave it to him because I wanted him to stop. That's not an excuse." "No," I said. "It isn't." Laura looked at him. Not cruelly. Worse. Clearly. Evan nodded. "I know." I asked him one question. "Did you know about the U-Haul?" "No." "Did you know about the utility mail?" "No." "Did you know he planned to put his name on my cabin sign?" Evan's face went blank. "What?" Laura whispered. "Dad." I told them about Price Lake Place. Evan put both hands over his face. That was the moment I stopped being angry at him. Not because he was innocent. He wasn't. But because shame had finally done what advice could not. Laura looked at me across the table. "What happens now?" I had been waiting for that. "Now," I said, "we make sure this never happens again." Gloria came to my house the following Thursday with a leather folder and 2 pens. She prefers blue ink because, as she once told me, original signatures should look alive. Laura and Evan arrived separately. I noticed that. They were working through something, and I did not ask from which room of the house Evan had slept the night before. Marriage has doors fathers should not kick open unless someone is trapped behind them. Gloria explained the documents slowly. First, the cabin would be moved into the Harlan family trust. I would control it while alive. Laura would have full beneficial rights after I passed, but the property could not be sold, borrowed against, renamed, leased, or transferred without trustee approval. No spouse, in-law, friend, cousin, or family guest would have independent access rights. Use required written permission. Access codes would be individual, logged, and revocable. Second, Any future spouse-related claim to the cabin or proceeds would require a properly drafted post-nuptial property agreement with independent counsel on both sides. Evan had already spoken with his own attorney. He had chosen to sign a written acknowledgement that the cabin was separate Harlan family property and that his parents had no rights, present or future. Third, Gloria created a separate education and start-in-life fund for any grandchildren I might one day have. Laura cried when Gloria read that part. Evan did, too, though he tried to hide it. The fund would not pass through Carl, Denise, Evan, or even Laura if circumstances ever made that unwise. It would be for the children. Clean, protected, patient. I had one more document. It was a letter to Carl and Denise, copied through Gloria, stating that they were barred from entering the cabin, the lane, the dock, or any Harlan Trust property. It included the sheriff's report number, the Saturday gate incident, the invoice, and a deadline for payment. Evan read it twice. Then he looked at me and said, "I'll make sure they pay it." "No," Laura said. We all turned to her. She wiped her eyes, sat straighter, and looked at her husband. "They pay it, not you. Not us. Them." Evan stared at her for a second, then nodded. "You're right. That was the first time I believed they might come out stronger than they went in." But Carl was not finished. Men like Carl do not accept closed doors until they bruise their shoulder on one. 2 weeks later, he drove to Grand Rapids and showed up at Laura and Evan's house. I know because Laura called me from the upstairs bedroom, while Evan kept Carl in the living room. Her voice was shaking with anger, not fear. "He says you're manipulating us," she said. "He says Evan should never have signed anything. What do you want me to do?" There was a pause. Then my daughter said, "Come over. And bring Gloria, if she's available." Gloria was always available for the right kind of trouble. We arrived within 30 minutes. Carl was standing in Laura's living room, red-faced, pointing at Evan. Denise sat stiffly on the sofa with her purse in her lap like a woman waiting for someone else's storm to clear the air. Carl turned when I walked in. "You?" he said. "Me," I said. Gloria stepped in behind me, red glasses low on her nose, holding a folder. Carl looked at her and actually laughed. "More paperwork?" Gloria said, "Yes. I have loved very few sentences more." She handed him a copy of the trespass notice, the unpaid invoice, and the camera still from the gate. Then she handed him a final letter informing him that if he contacted Laura or Evan regarding the cabin, the trust, the invoice, or any inheritance matter again, all communication would go through counsel. Carl scanned the letter, and the laugh left his face one line at a time. "You people are insane," he said. Laura walked down the stairs then. She had been crying, but she was done with that part. "No," she said, "we're done being useful." Carl turned toward her. "Laura, you don't understand what your father is doing." "I understand exactly what he's doing," she said. "He's protecting something my mother loved from people who tried to put their name on it." Denise flinched. That told me she knew about the sign. Carl looked at Evan. "Are you going to let her talk to us like this?" Evan stood beside my daughter, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. "Yes," he said. One word. Maybe the best one he had ever spoken. Carl's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Gloria tapped the invoice with one red fingernail. "Payment is due Friday." Denise stood and picked up her purse. "Carl," she said quietly, "let's go." He looked around the room, searching for someone who would give him back the old rules. Nobody did. They left without slamming the door. That surprised me. But sometimes defeat is too heavy for drama. The invoice was paid by cashier's check 2 days later. The cabin stayed quiet the rest of that summer. In July, Laura and Evan came up with me for a weekend. Evan repaired the loose step by the dock without being asked. Laura cleaned the kitchen and put Helen's blue cookie jar back on the counter. I watched her do it from the porch, and for a moment, with the lake bright behind her and her mother's jar in her hands, I had to look away. That evening we sat outside while the water went dark and the first mosquitoes came out like tiny tax collectors. Evan stood near the grill, nervous, holding a small paper bag. "I brought something," he said. He pulled out a new wooden sign, wrapped in brown paper. My chest tightened before I could stop it. Then he turned it around. It said, Harlan Cabin, not new letters. He had hired a local painter to match Helen's style from photographs. Not perfect, but respectful, careful, humble. Laura looked at me. Evan said, I know I don't get to fix what my dad did with one sign, but I wanted the right name back where it belongs. I took the sign from him. My hands were not as steady as I wanted them to be. Get the drill, I said. We hung it together at the end of the lane. Carl and Denise have never returned. They have never apologized either, but I stopped waiting for that. Some people use apologies like coupons. They only offer them when they think they will get something back. Evan and Laura are still married. Better, I think, than before. Not easier. Better. There is a difference. Evan learned that peace bought by surrendering boundaries is not peace. Laura learned that love can forgive a mistake without pretending it was harmless. And I learned that protecting your family sometimes means building walls strong enough that the people you love can stop holding the door shut with their own bodies. The Harlan Family Trust is signed, funded, and sitting in Gloria's office with copies in my safe. The cabin has cameras now, individual access codes, and a gate that makes a very satisfying sound when it closes. The grandchildren fund exists too. No grandchildren yet, but I am a patient man. Good things built correctly can wait. Last October, I drove up alone for the first time after all of it. The air smelled like leaves and cold water. I opened the cabin, set my bag down, and walked straight to the screened porch. Helen's rocker was where it belonged, angled toward the lake. I sat in it with a cup of coffee and listened to the wind move through the pines. On the counter behind me, her blue cookie jar sat empty. I smiled at that. A kitchen with an empty cookie jar still says somebody is expected. Just not everybody. Not anymore. And if Carl Price ever sits at his breakfast table in Indiana thinking about the cabin he almost renamed, I hope he remembers the gate, the deputy, the invoice, the documents, his son standing beside my daughter, and the sign he never got to hang. Because the day he walked into my wife's cabin and called it his family's future was the day I made sure he had no future there at all. A key can open a door, my friends, but a deed, a sheriff's report, and a well-written trust can close one forever. The cabin stayed protected not because Walter closed his heart, but because he finally opened his eyes to what love requires. Family is not built by taking what was never offered. It is built by respect, honest words, and the courage to guard what others may one day need. When boundaries are kind and firm, love has room to breathe.